Chapter 2. Nancy stood in Barton's dressing room with her friends and the rest of Bent Fender. On the vanity lay uncapped tubes and containers of stage makeup. An open can of cherry Coke was almost full. A guitar was leaned up in the corner of the room, next to a portable amplifier. "It looks like he was right in the middle of getting ready," Nancy said. "Not like he planned on going anywhere." "You're sure?" Roger asked. "There's no question about it," Nancy replied grimly, bending down to look under the vanity. A pair of cowboy boots, the ones the rock star always wore on stage, sat on the floor. "Barton had these on when we were introduced to him before. That means that wherever he is, he's barefoot," George finished. "Exactly. That's why I don't think he intended to leave this room." "You mean he was just sitting here and then—" Bess's voice trailed off. "Something happened. Maybe someone knocked on the door and he got up to answer it." Nancy thought out loud, trying to piece the puzzle together. She felt herself switching gears, the excitement she'd experienced at meeting her rock idols melting into the clear, quick thinking that had earned her her reputation as a detective. She pulled open the door to the little dressing room, just as Barton might have done. Across the corridor was a rehearsal studio for the Rockettes, who danced in special shows at Radio City Music Hall. Lights from the street washed through the room, glinting off the mirrors lining one wall. The hallway between the two rooms was littered with stage props and lighting equipment. Nancy stepped out of the room to inspect the jumble of boxes, painted scenery, and other theater paraphernalia. "Hey, you guys, come look at this!" A few yards down the hall, the contents of a box of lighting gels was scattered every which way. A papier-mâché tree trunk nearby was broken in half. "Looks like a scuffle," Nancy noted. "Here's something else," Bess observed. A broken lamp lay on the floor down the hall. "Wow, there's a whole trail of things," Nancy said. "I don't know, Nancy." Linda Farrar spoke up. "We've performed in a lot of places, and it's not that unusual for the backstage or storage areas to be a jumble of stuff like this." She paused, and her voice dropped. "Besides, I think there's something you ought to know. It's been kept quite quiet because we don't want the press to find out. But this isn't the first time." "I don't understand." Nancy surveyed the trail of clues. "Has Barton vanished before?" "Not exactly," Mark Bailey spoke up. "A few years back, twice, he just took off. We were scared stiff at first because he didn't tell anyone anything, but both times it turned out that he just couldn't cope with the pressure of being a super celebrity. The first time he flew off to some island in the Mediterranean and rented himself a house on the beach for a few weeks. The second time he spent the weekend with some friends in the country." "Yeah, but Mark, don't forget, that was 2 years ago," Roger said, "when we were just starting to make it big. Barton's gotten much better about dealing with his fame." A worried look crossed his face. "I just don't have the same feeling about this." "Why not?" "Look," Roger said, "this whole rock for relief thing was his idea. I know he's pretty quiet about his sister, but he's totally devoted to her. You know that. He wouldn't let her, or anyone like her, down." "What does his sister have to do with it?" Nancy asked. "She's been in a wheelchair all her life," Roger explained. "That's one of the reasons Barton got the idea for these shows. I'm positive that he wouldn't run out on us now. Besides, if he were planning on going, he wouldn't have left all that stuff in his dressing room. Even his guitar is there." Jim Parker ran a nervous hand through his short dark hair. "But he's got 2 other guitars, Roger. I don't know. Barton's done some crazy things." Nancy listened carefully. Barton was beginning to be a real human being to her, with fears and weaknesses like any person. If he had chosen to vanish before, she had to consider the possibility that he might do it again. On the other hand, there was evidence to the contrary. Nancy sighed. I can't begin to make guesses about someone I've just met, but I'm inclined to agree with Roger. Vanishing just before a big show like this doesn't make sense and isn't going to be overlooked by the press. If Barton wanted to get away from it all, he couldn't have picked a worse moment to do it. Look, everything you're saying sounds reasonable, Linda volunteered. And it's true that Barton's become more comfortable being a hot item. But just recently, he's been a lot more like the old Barton. I don't know. He seems really uptight about something. Nancy couldn't help thinking about the urgency she'd sensed when Barton had asked her about her detective work. Linda, do you have any idea what was bothering him? Linda shrugged. Beats me, but he's been acting weird for the past couple of weeks. Ever since what? Ever since we started talking about our new contract. Linda's olive complexion went pale. She glanced from one member of Bent Fender to the next. You don't think he's going to leave the band, do you? No way, Lynn. Roger reassured her. Look at the way he's been going at the songs he's writing for the new album. He's totally into the music we're making now. Roger paused. But he has been tense about the contract. He turned to Nancy to explain. He thinks we're not getting all the royalties we're entitled to. He started fighting with our agent and our producer. That's why we called your father. We decided to bring in a lawyer. Nancy nodded. But before she could ask more questions, the telephone in Barton's dressing room rang shrilly. Mark grabbed the receiver. Yes? Pause. Hey, thanks for calling. Have you found him yet? His expression darkened, and Nancy held her breath. Right. Okay, I understand. That was the stage manager, Mark said when he hung up. No trace of Barton, and the audience is getting pretty rowdy. They want to know why we're not on stage. What do we do? Jim shook his head thoughtfully. Phew, all those handicapped kids are out there. We can't let them down. Yeah, but how are we supposed to play without the main attraction? Linda asked, her tough tone barely hiding the concern in her voice. Boy, if this is Barton's fault, I'm going to make him disappear for good. I could cover the leads, Mark said. But can you imagine doing Fever with one guitar? Fever? What a great tune! I can play every riff in that song, Alan said. Roger spun around and looked him squarely in the eye. Hey, I'm sorry. Alan looked at the ground, embarrassed. At a time like this, I guess no one wants to hear me go on about playing your music. No, maybe we do, Roger said, studying Alan intently. Can you play all our tunes? Well, yeah. Really well, Bess added proudly. He has a great voice, too. Roger grabbed Barton's guitar from the corner of the room and fiddled with the knobs and dials on the amp. Try the fast middle section on Fever. He pressed the guitar into Alan's hands. Astonishment filled Alan's brown eyes. Roger flashed him a smile of encouragement. Go ahead, he said. Nancy listened as Alan tuned the guitar strings and, after taking a long, deep breath, sang the familiar Fender music in a clear, confident voice. Not bad. Linda's face was serious, her eyes appraising. What else can you do? How about Little Brother? Jim asked, as Alan finished up on Fever. Do you know that one? Alan's brow crinkled in concentration. That's an oldie, he said, but I think I can do it. Once again, music filled the room as Alan broke into a slow, dreamy number from Bent Fender's first album. What do you say? Roger addressed his fellow band members. One by one, Nancy saw them signal their approval. Champ, Roger said, putting his hand on Alan's shoulder. How would you like to be our pinch hitter tonight? As if in a fog, Alan put down the guitar. Me? You want me to play with Bent Fender? Here? We need your help, Roger said. "We'll pull you through the rough spots," Mark promised. Nancy watched as Alan's angular features reflected a rainbow of emotions, from doubt to dazed happiness. Then the smile left his face. "What about Barton?" he asked suddenly. "Are you going to call the police?" "They wouldn't take this seriously," Roger replied gloomily. "Not after the other 2 times. Barton's earned himself quite a reputation." "But you can't just do nothing," George said. Nancy cleared her throat. Despite seeing her dreams of vacation vanishing as rapidly as Barton had, she said, "Look, maybe I could—" "Nancy, would you?" Roger didn't even wait for her to finish her sentence. "I can't tell you how grateful I'd be." Linda, Jim, and Mark echoed his sentiments. "Nancy Drew can't turn down a chance to do some sleuthing," George said. "It's in her blood to track down clues." Nancy had to admit that George was right. Nothing was more of a challenge than solving a mystery. But just then, the tingle of enthusiasm that she usually felt at the beginning of a case was overshadowed by her worries about Barton. Maybe he was running away again, but if not, she couldn't lose any time. He might be in terrible danger. As she combed the halls of the renowned Radio City Music Hall, Nancy could hear strains of the concert coming from the direction of the stage. Alan's playing wasn't as slick or polished as Barton's, but from what Nancy could hear, his fingers were really flying over Barton's guitar. The rest of the band was helping Alan out by covering more of the leads themselves and taking more solos. Still, Alan was winging it like a true pro. Nancy wished she could be in the wings watching, but finding Barton came first. Bess and George had offered to help her, but she insisted they enjoy the show, telling them she would come get them if she needed their help. Bess, in particular, had looked relieved, obviously not wanting to miss a single note of Alan's performance. The sounds of the concert grew clearer as Nancy entered an elevator, pressing the button for the street level. When the elevator door slid open and she headed for the guard's booth, the music grew faint again. The guards and some of Fender's roadies were playing cards, but the bearded guard she had met before looked up from his hand when Nancy asked about Barton. "Novak hasn't shown yet," he said. "And you haven't seen anyone back here besides the people with the band?" "The only folks I let in, besides you and your friends, were these guys here." He pointed to the 3 card-playing roadies. "The gal running the lights, the guy at the soundboard, the stage manager, and the 2 who were unloading equipment before the show." "What 2? One of the roadies, a lanky, fair-haired young man, put down a can of beer and shot the guard a puzzled look. "We unloaded all the equipment this morning." The guard frowned. "You're off the wall," he snapped. "Those guys had passes and they were carrying boxes and stuff." "They weren't with us," another roadie declared. Nancy drew in her breath. "Sounds like trouble." She opened her shoulder bag and took out a felt-tipped pen and the tiny notebook she always carried with her. "Tell me everything you can remember about those guys," she said. "One of them was real big, tall with brown hair," said the bearded guard. "How was I supposed to know they didn't belong here? And those boxes, they looked like they had instruments in them, you know." "Guitar cases?" "Yeah, I guess. And they had a huge brown box, too. Looked like the kind that refrigerators are packed in. Actually, they left with that one. Said they were taking out a broken speaker." Nancy's heart sank, a terrible thought occurring to her. Was that box large enough to hold a person? "I don't believe it!" exclaimed the blonde-haired roadie, throwing down his cards. "Did you let some thugs carry Barton out of here in a box, you morons?" "Please!" Nancy shouted. She got the group calmed down and continued to pump the guards for information about the 2 unknown men. Was the tall man's hair straight? She prodded. Curly? Straight. Not too much of it, I don't think. I sort of remember a bald spot. And he was a heavy fellow, dressed in jeans and a jeans jacket. What about the other one? Nancy said. Younger, your age maybe. Shorter, but he looked strong. Dark, wavy hair, longish, parted on the side. He had on slacks. Gray ones, I think, put in the other guard. And a button-down shirt. Oh, and he had on a heavy gold chain and a gold ring. I noticed the ring when he showed us their passes. Real different looking, like a sea serpent or something, and it had little red jewels for eyes. That's terrific, Nancy said. Thank you. Anything else you can think of that might help me? Well, one of the guards said slowly, we have had a little trouble around here lately. Break-ins, equipment missing, that sort of thing. But I don't see what that would have to do with Barton. All right, said Nancy. Well, you've been a big help. Now what are you going to do? The roadie asked. I want to take one more look around and make sure I didn't miss anything. Nancy didn't discover anything more in the basement or on the street level. The rehearsal studios were dead ends. But as she poked around near Barton's dressing room, she spotted 2 black instrument cases. She'd seen the cases earlier and thought nothing of them. But because of her talk with the security guards, she raced over and unlatched them. Empty. They'd probably been carried in just so the 2 mysterious men would look as if they belonged backstage. Nancy poked at one of them. It moved slightly, and she noticed something new, a fat wallet. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. The wallet was made of soft, top-quality leather, decorated on one side with a tooled design of a dragon, its tail curled into the letter L. It was bulging with money. Nancy ran her finger over the raised leather. Suddenly she remembered the guard's description of the gold ring one man was wearing. He had said it was shaped like a sea serpent. But couldn't the sea serpent have been a dragon? Eagerly, Nancy opened the wallet to see what other clues she could find. But just as she did, she heard a noise behind her. She whipped around and felt a dull thud on her head. It was the last thing she remembered before everything went black. End of Chapter 2.